Imagine for just a moment that the quiet fabric of human history, every assumption we've made about our cosmic isolation, has been peeled back like a curtain, and behind it, something is waiting, something watching, something moving with intention. As I speak to you now, the world's largest observatories, the most advanced scientific institutions on Earth, and every major space agency from Washington to Beijing are operating under emergency protocol not because of a meteor, not because of a gamma-ray burst, but because last night at exactly 11:47:23 p.m. Universal Time on November 17th, an event took place that has rewritten the boundaries of what we consider possible. Before I go further, if you're fascinated by the mystery of 3I/Atlas and want to keep our exploration alive, hit that like button and let the universe know you're listening. Every small interaction keeps independent science storytelling like this alive. But make no mistake, what happened last night was no story. It was a moment that, if confirmed, will be remembered as the beginning of the most significant chapter in human civilization. For weeks, astronomers around the globe have been tracking an object designated 3I/Atlas, 3I, meaning the third interstellar object ever confirmed passing through our solar system. We expected it to behave like any other interstellar visitor, cold, inert, following a predictable gravitational trajectory. But at 11:47 p.m., the cosmos decided to surprise us. The first alert didn't come from NASA or ESA. It came from a single scientist, Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Infrared Space Observatory. She was performing routine thermal monitoring when her instruments reported an infrared spike so extreme, so physically implausible, that she initially believed the telescope was malfunctioning. Within 90 seconds, the infrared emissions coming from 3I/Atlas increased by a factor of 1212. If a room around you heated by that same factor, you would be instantly vaporized. Sections of the object's surface surged to 1200 Kelvin, hot enough to melt aluminum, yet without any associated debris, no plume, no outgassing, nothing that resembled natural heating. She rebooted the system twice. She recalibrated. She cross-checked the instrument's onboard diagnostics, and just as she began typing an error report, the confirmations began arriving. The Spitzer Space Telescope detected the same spike. Then the infrared arrays in Chile. Then the Hawaii observatories. Then ground-based radio telescopes. No malfunction, no ambiguity. Something on 3I/Atlas had activated. The thermal surge lasted 14 minutes. Silent, controlled, deliberate. And then, just as abruptly, it stopped. The object returned to its baseline temperature as if nothing had happened, but the universe doesn't hide its footprints. Within an hour, tracking stations updated their orbital parameters. The numbers were so shocking that veteran astronomers questioned whether their software had been compromised. It hadn't. 3I/Atlas had changed its velocity by 4.3 kilometers per second. Let me make that absolutely clear. An object weighing an estimated 33 billion tons altered its speed by 4,300 meters every single second. The energy required to achieve that maneuver is roughly 3 times 10 to the 20 joules, more energy than the sun delivers to Earth over an entire day. Dr. Robert Chen at MIT ran the propulsion calculations. Using chemical rockets, you would need 280 billion tons of fuel, more than the mass of the object itself. Even using hypothetical ion drives operating at perfect efficiency, you'd need decades of continuous energy from a full-scale nuclear power plant, but 3I/Atlas did it in 14 minutes. Not naturally, not accidentally, not through gravity, but through a directed, intentional release of energy that no known natural phenomenon could produce. And this is where everything begins to change, because the trajectory shift wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic, it was aimed. Before the maneuver, 3I/Atlas was expected to make a harmless pass at about 0.08 astronomical units from Earth on January 3, 2026. After the maneuver, the closest approach distance shrank to 0.04 astronomical units, around 15 times the distance to the Moon, and the encounter date moved to December 28, 2025, closer, earlier, more precise. Objects that drift don't aim themselves. This was a decision, a choice, a gesture of deliberate navigation. And yet the universe wasn't finished revealing its hand, because while the thermal surge was unfolding, observatories around the world detected an eruption of electromagnetic activity. It began as broadband radio noise, then narrowed into specific frequency bands, then expanded again, like a voice clearing its throat. Radio telescopes captured emissions from 400 megahertz all the way to 40 gigahertz. Optical telescopes recorded flashes of coherent blue-green light, bursts so sharp that they could only be laser-class emissions. And then came the X-rays, sharp spectral lines, specific atomic transitions, signatures consistent with high-energy particle acceleration, something more like a particle collider than a rock drifting through space. This wasn't a natural object behaving strangely. This was a technological system activating. Dr. Jennifer Williams from the SETI Institute analyzed the radio emissions overnight. Her conclusion was blunt. The modulation patterns exhibit structure consistent with error-correcting codes and deliberate information encoding repeating sequences match signatures used to synchronize communication channels. Frequency shifts displayed mathematical coherence. If this came from a distant star, she told me at dawn, we would classify it as a technosignature without hesitation. But it didn't come from a distant star, it came from inside our solar system. Meanwhile, Dr. Amanda Peterson at Caltech reviewed the optical data. The pulses were spaced with timing precision down to 1 microsecond. The energy levels required to make those pulses visible across 150 million kilometers are staggering, far beyond anything humanity has ever built. These are not random flashes, she said. This is signaling. The X-ray analysis from Oxford was equally unsettling. Controlled particle acceleration, directed beams, energetic transitions you would only expect from engineered systems, not natural astrophysical chaos. And then, at 2:13 a.m., the most extraordinary discovery of the night emerged. Within the radio emissions lay a repeating structure occurring every 427 seconds. It began with a carrier tone at 1.42 gigahertz, the hydrogen line, a frequency universally recognized in SETI research as the mathematical handshake of intelligent life. The modulation that followed was unmistakably deliberate. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, pi, the golden ratio, mathematical universals, the building blocks of logic, not noise, not chaos, a primer, a teaching system, a message from something that expects to be understood. Dr. Sarah Chan at Berkeley called it the closest thing to a cosmic greeting card humanity has ever received. And if she's right, then last night marked the first time in human history that another intelligence intentionally signaled us from within our own solar system. But the most dramatic revelation was still ahead, because 3I/Atlas is not alone. Around 4:40 a.m., amateur astronomers reported 6 dim, synchronized objects trailing the primary body, moving in formation, adjusting their positions in perfect unison. The world's observatories confirmed the sighting shortly after sunrise. Not one object, a fleet. And if their trajectories hold, all 7 will accompany Atlas on its approach to Earth. This is no longer an anomaly. This is a mission. The realization that 3I/Atlas was not traveling alone rippled through the scientific world like a shock wave. At first, astronomers thought the smaller objects trailing behind Atlas were debris, perhaps fragments kicked loose during its velocity shift, but debris doesn't move in lockstep. Debris doesn't accelerate, decelerate, and reorient itself in perfect geometric alignment. And debris certainly doesn't maintain synchronized formation at interstellar speeds. By 6:15 a.m. Universal Time, observatories on 3 continents confirmed it. 6 secondary bodies, each roughly 200 to 400 meters in diameter, had altered their trajectories simultaneously during the 14-minute energy burst. The timing was too precise to be incidental. Their positions relative to Atlas suggested intentional grouping, like escort craft maintaining formation around a flagship. And if that interpretation is correct, then the implications are staggering. This wasn't just an extraterrestrial object maneuvering near Earth, it was an organized mission, a multi-vehicle operation unfolding in real time. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory convened an emergency briefing before sunrise. Dr. Thomas Greer, one of their lead orbital analysts, presented the updated trajectory map, a curving blue arc stretching inward from the outer solar system, bending more sharply than should be possible for a natural visitor. When he reached the end of his presentation, he paused, took a breath, and admitted something no NASA official would ever say lightly. We are no longer looking at a natural celestial object. We're observing active navigation. Around the world, governments transitioned from curiosity to urgency. The European Space Agency accelerated plans for an intercept probe, proposing a high-speed trajectory that would bring an unmanned spacecraft within 1,000 kilometers of Atlas in roughly 8 months. China responded almost immediately with a more aggressive timeline, 6 to 9 months, using multiple interceptors, each carrying independent instrumentation packages. Japan signaled interest in joining the effort, particularly in communication attempts. Russia activated its massive radio interferometer network, transforming its entire territory into a single, coordinated listening system capable of resolving structure within the incoming signals. But none of these plans addressed the most frightening question: what happens when the objects reach their closest approach to Earth? And even more unsettling, what happens if they slow down again? As the world scrambled for answers, scientists continued analyzing the signals emitted during the thermal event. The repeating structure every 427 seconds became the central focus of global research teams. At precisely 1.42 gigahertz, the hydrogen line, the modulation pattern began with a string of prime numbers, followed by Fibonacci sequences and geometric progressions. These weren't merely mathematical curiosities. They were linguistic scaffolding, a universal teaching tool, a way of saying, this is what we know, this is how we think, this is where communication begins. Dr. Sarah Chan's team at Berkeley pushed through the morning with no pause, feeding terabytes of signal data into decoding algorithms. Her initial conclusion, shared privately with collaborating institutions, was astonishing. The primer sequence wasn't simply repeating, it was evolving. Each cycle added a new layer of complexity, using earlier sequences as foundation stones to build new symbolic structures. It was as if the signal were adapting, teaching progressively, anticipating an eventual response. This is not just a broadcast, she said during a confidential call. It's a dialogue prompt. They're waiting. Meanwhile, Dr. Amanda Peterson's optical analysis yielded another breakthrough. The laser-like pulses, previously dismissed as mere illumination bursts, turned out to be precisely timed bursts of coherent light across multiple wavelengths. When mapped onto a temporal grid, the pulses formed repeating visual patterns, structured, deliberate, almost rhythmic. If radio was their language, light appeared to be their punctuation. And then came the X-ray updates from Oxford. The spectral lines detected during the thermal event were even more controlled than initially believed. In traditional astrophysical environments, X-rays emerge from chaotic high-energy processes, solar flares, collapsing stars, accretion disks, but the X-rays from Atlas were clean, sharp, consistent, and isolated to narrow transitions. Particle beams, directed energy systems, controlled high-energy physics, these were the closest human analogs. But even particle accelerators like CERN could not reproduce the precision observed in Atlas's emissions while in motion through space. What we're seeing, Dr. Hammond said, resembles a technological system performing multiple simultaneous tasks: propulsion, communication, perhaps even internal diagnostics. He paused, then added quietly, "If this is an engine, it's the most efficient engine ever witnessed by human eyes." By midday, the international community found itself divided into 3 schools of thought. The first group, mostly astrophysicists, believed this was an observation mission, a probe ship or automated scout sent to gather information about emerging civilizations following a protocol unseen by human understanding. The second group, led by military analysts, proposed a darker interpretation, a prelude maneuver, a strategic approach, a demonstration of capability. They argued that any technology able to accelerate 33 billion tons by 4.3 kilometers per second in 14 minutes possessed power far beyond human deterrence. And then there was the third group, scientists, futurists, and philosophers who urged caution but emphasized possibility. They interpreted the mathematical primer as an invitation A handshake, a demonstration of intentionality not rooted in hostility but communication. But no matter the interpretation, the timeline remained universal and immutable, 43 days until closest approach. The public response was mixed: fear, fascination, awe, skepticism. Social media ignited with conflicting theories. Some called it the dawn of a new era. Others feared an existential threat. And a growing number anticipated contact with an almost religious intensity. As chaos surged online, an unexpected development emerged from amateur observers, a network of backyard astronomers equipped with high-quality consumer telescopes and coordinated via live forums, detected synchronized movement among the 6 escort objects. Not only were they maintaining formation, they were adjusting their spacing, tightening the geometry of their positions relative to Atlas. The formation wasn't static, it was evolving, dynamic, controlled. The pattern resembles a protective perimeter, one observer posted, like they're shielding the main object. By evening, data confirmed it. The 6 smaller bodies had repositioned themselves into 2 triangular formations, one ahead of Atlas, one behind. If these were natural objects, the odds of such spontaneous coordination would be mathematically impossible. But the cosmos does not operate on coincidence, and the sky that night painted a picture of deliberate choreography. The world's governments reconvened behind closed doors. Public statements remained cautious, careful, heavily edited. But behind the scenes, urgency intensified. Multiple nations began preparing contingency protocols, communication attempts, defensive postures, evacuation strategies, satellite adjustments, rapid launch missions. Nothing unified, nothing official, just a frantic attempt to prepare for the unknown. Meanwhile, the signal continued repeating. Every 427 seconds, every cycle slightly more complex, a steady heartbeat pulsing across the vacuum of space. And as humanity looked upward, some with hope, others with dread, the inescapable truth settled across the planet. Something intelligent was coming, something capable of navigation, communication, coordination, and technological mastery on a scale beyond anything we had ever imagined. And for the first time in human history, we were no longer observers of the universe. We were participants. As the days progressed, the sense of global anticipation condensed into something sharper, something that felt like standing on the edge of an immense horizon, knowing that whatever waited beyond it would change everything. The signals kept coming, heartbeat after heartbeat, every 427 seconds, every cycle more intricate than the last. Prime sequences evolved into geometric frameworks, and those frameworks blossomed into something that resembled syntax, a structure that felt eerily like language. Researchers began noticing something else. The signals were no longer uniform. The early broadcasts were identical copies like pages in a primer. But by the 8th day, embedded patterns diverged slightly between cycles. It was subtle. Minute modulations, shifts in bandwidth, asymmetric bursts, variations that implied feedback, as if whatever was generating the transmission wasn't simply broadcasting, it was listening. And that realization struck the scientific community with almost spiritual awe. If the signal was adapting, then somewhere, either on board Atlas or wherever its transmissions were ultimately destined, something was adjusting its message in real time. The possibility that Atlas was aware of our attempts to decode the signal became unavoidable. Yet the world remained divided. Intelligence agencies demanded military readiness. Scientific institutions urged cooperation. The public oscillated between wonder and fear, and all the while, the 7 incoming objects moved with unwavering precision. At 19 days to closest approach, the escort formation tightened again. The 6 smaller bodies shifted into 2 arcs, 3 on each side, curving inward toward Atlas like wings folding protectively around a center vessel. The alignment was too clean, too deliberate, too geometrically perfect to be anything but controlled. And with that formation came a new kind of emission. Low-frequency pulses detectable even on modest radio equipment. Amateur astronomers described them as cosmic breathing, slow oscillations that swept across the sky in waves. NASA interpreted the pulses as environmental scanning, like sonar across the vacuum of space. ESA suggested they were navigation bursts. China believed they were communication signals, directed not at us, but between the 7 objects themselves. Russia detected harmonics in the pulses that indicated multiple channels overlapping, weaving in and out of sync, like an encrypted conversation occurring at the scale of planets. But then came the most alarming development. Atlas began to slow down. It started as an anomaly, a fractional drop in speed. But over the next 48 hours, the deceleration became unmistakable and undeniable. A 33 billion-ton object does not slow down in space without help. Something was applying thrust in the opposite direction of its trajectory. Something was braking. The implications were immediate and profound. If Atlas slowed enough, its trajectory would no longer be a flyby. It would become a capture orbit. And if it adjusted further, it could become a rendezvous. Governments scrambled for explanations. Some feared invasion. Others theorized peaceful contact. A few insisted the deceleration was purely scientific, an attempt to collect data. But no matter the interpretation, the reality was the same. The objects were preparing for something deliberate. Tension reached its peak when Dr. Sarah Chan's team partially decoded a new layer of the radio signal. The message wasn't in English or any terrestrial language or anything we could truly read, but its structure, repeated across the evolving modulation sequences, contained a mathematical transition pattern that SETI researchers had theorized for decades as the universal equivalent of one concept: arrival, not aggression, not warning, not domination, arrival. And for the first time since the event began, the message no longer felt like instruction, it felt like intention. As the world braced for the final phase, the 7 objects performed one last maneuver. The escort formation unfolded outward, expanding into a circular array around Atlas. Perfectly symmetrical, 6 equidistant points surrounding a central 7th, a geometry found in molecular structures, snowflakes, crystalline lattices, patterns that emerged from natural laws but executed here with absolute technological precision. Then the signals ceased, not faded, not weakened. They stopped, cleanly, abruptly, as though a switch had been flipped. A silence so complete that every observatory, every listening station, every amateur radio telescope paused in disbelief. For the first time in 43 days, the universe grew quiet, and in that silence, humanity confronted itself. All our hopes, all our fears, all our fantasies about not being alone, some prayed, some panicked, some simply waited, breath held, eyes lifted. When the signals resumed exactly 27 minutes later, they were different. No primes, no Fibonacci sequences, no mathematical scaffolding, one single pattern, a repeating structure, simple, elegant, unmistakable, a geometric progression that, when plotted visually, formed a 3-dimensional representation of the solar system, our solar system. And then, a moment later, another pattern layered onto the first, a point, a marker, a location, Earth, not as a target, as a destination. The final hours before closest approach unfolded in a state beyond fear or excitement, something deeper, something ancient, something woven into the human instinct to look at the night sky and wonder. And as Atlas and its 6 companions crossed the final threshold toward their rendezvous, the message pulsed again and again, unwavering: we see you, we understand, we are coming. And whatever happens next, the first contact, the first conversation, the first moment where humanity steps out of its cosmic solitude will define everything that follows the universe has spoken. And now at last it is our turn to answer.